Hitler's relationship with women was always dark. It was said that he was perverse and also that he was impotent. The truth is that, although there are different versions, some more sinister, others simply macabre, the Führer's life was marked by several notable women. Those who knew him during those years affirm that Geli, his underage niece, was the only woman he ever loved. On the other hand, there are records that his relationship with Eva Braun, the only one he ever married, was cold and dispassionate, a desperate attempt to avoid dying alone. Renate Müller, actress and occasional lover of the leader, died mysteriously after falling out of a Berlin hospital window, under circumstances still under debate. Unity Mitford, a young English aristocrat obsessed with Hitler, tried to get away from him when she realized she could never fully be loved, leaving her with severe brain damage until her death years later. What really happened to the women who were with the Führer? It's all in the family, the dark romance between Hitler and his niece. Geli Raubal was Hitler's niece and 19 years younger than the Nazi leader. They lived together for a long time, and much evidence indicates that the Führer was in love with the girl and forced her to have sexual relations with him. In 1931, Geli was found dead in the apartment she shared with Hitler, and to this day, it is believed that he may have murdered her. The relationship between Hitler and his niece, Angela Maria Raubal, nicknamed Geli, was always shrouded in doubt, mystery, and suspicions of incest. A relationship without parity, with an enormous difference, in which obsession was a permanent component, and with a sexual component whose true scope could never be determined. Geli Raubal was the daughter of Angela Hitler, Adolf's paternal sister. She worked as a housekeeper in Vienna and was widowed at a young age, raising several children. The youngest, Geli, was 2 years old. When her brother's political career began to take off, he took her to Munich and hired her as his housekeeper, a job she retained at Hitler's Berghof, his home in the Alps as Führer. Hitler had always shown a fondness for Geli. When she turned 16, he brought her to live with him. He publicly stated that he cared for his niece and wanted to provide her with a good education. She began studying medicine but soon dropped out to devote herself to singing and acting. Hitler, her uncle, hired the best teachers in all of Germany for her. Hitler took her to public events, they went to the theater, and they were seen eating together every night in the city's best restaurants. Those who saw them moving together claimed that he seemed happy in her company, that her boldness amused and embarrassed him at the same time. She had an outgoing personality, long hair, a broad smile, and lively eyes. She dressed older than her age, and at 16 she was dazzled by this powerful man who provided her with attention, protection, and a living. When she turned 20, Geli began an affair with Emile Maurice, her uncle's chauffeur. When he found out, Hitler kicked the man out and restricted her every move. He began to monitor her every activity and forbid her from leaving the house alone. Years later, letters written by the young woman after the forced breakup were found in which she told Emile that they had to wait, that in 2 years everything would be different. Hitler had promised her that when she was older she would be able to live her own life. A few years later, Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, stated that Hitler had told him he was in love with her, and that despite his promises to remain single, he might even have married her niece. His love for her was so great that he felt obliged to watch over Geli's future. This meant that he would prevent any relationship that he considered inappropriate or untimely. This was his excuse to keep suitors who might approach her away from her. During those years, Geli had other brief affairs. All of them were hidden from her uncle, who, under the pretext of protecting her and keeping her away from those who could harm her, was jealous of her and devoted all his obsession to her. In other letters addressed to her mother and friends, Geli Raubal speaks admiringly of Uncle Alf. He recounts how he would take her out to dinner, what his favorite activities were, and the notable figures they frequented. No one can say for sure whether their relationship was sexual in nature, but what is undeniable to most historians and biographers who have studied the subject is that Hitler, 19 years her senior, developed an unhealthy obsession with Geli, one of oppression and control. He was simultaneously an uncle, a lover, whether physical or platonic, a provider and a captor. One of Geli's ex-boyfriends claimed that she wasn't particularly bright or refined. Whether he was motivated by spite, a need to distance himself from Nazism, or a dispassionate analysis of his past relationships is unknown. The truth is that the women Hitler associated with were of a lower class than his, didn't show much interest, were much younger, and this made them financially and socially dependent on him. Geli was found dead under completely suspicious circumstances. The girl's death was quickly ruled self-destruction, and the police did not investigate further. A subsequent complaint forced the case to be reopened months later, but the case was taken up by a judge who again closed it within hours. That judge would become the first Minister of Justice of the Third Reich. No one thought strange that she hadn't given any clues about the decision she was about to make, nor that she had left a half-written letter addressed to a mysterious man speaking of the future. Nor did the nature of the relationship or her uncle's recurrent behavior toward her seem suspicious. Hitler was on the rise to power, so a personal matter like this was ignored, and almost no one wanted to discuss it. Some apocryphal historians claimed it was an incestuous relationship, and that Hitler subjected her to aberrant practices, and that Geli couldn't stand it anymore. After Geli was found dead, Hitler suffered a deep depression, and several of his close associates feared he would take his own life. This state lasted a few days. Some claim that this episode, Geli's death, Raubal, had as a consequence that he lost the last vestiges of humanity that he possessed, and that he ended up becoming that criminal being that he ended up being as a Nazi leader, although the truth is that the entire history of Hitler is marked by inhumanity, power and cruelty, and the way in which he treated this girl is part of the catalogue of infamous links of the Führer. Crimes in flagrante. Mitzi Reiter, the 16-year-old lover Hitler promised to marry. Maria Reiter met Adolf Hitler in 1926, when he was 37 and she was 16, shortly after he had left prison and written Mein Kampf. Their first meeting was anything but romantic. Maria Josefa Reiter was with her older sister Anna in the park in the town of Berchtesgaden, located a few kilometers from the Austrian border. 2 weeks earlier, their mother had died of cancer. Adolf Hitler by then was already a central figure in the National Socialist Party of Germany. He had seen both of them in the business they ran below the hotel where Hitler was staying. The Deutsche House, and the youngest of the sisters, who was only 16 years old, obsessed him. It had always been that way. All his relationships were with women much younger than him. His niece Geli Raubal was 19 years older than him, and Eva Braun, his most famous relationship, was 23 years younger than him. Mitzi, as Maria Reiter was known, would be no exception. Mitzi's parents were Karl and Mara. Karl was a tailor and sympathized with the Social Democratic Party, whose ideas were completely opposed to Nazism. With great effort, he had founded a small business linked to the textile industry. His wife, Mara, was a homemaker. They had 4 children, 2 boys, Karl and Richard, and 2 girls, Anna and Mitzi. When Mitzi's mother died, she was forced to leave school and start working in the clothing business in Obersalzberg, where she met Hitler. The Führer approached the girls and began talking to Mitzi, who was with her dog, a German shepherd named Marcus. Hitler used his own dog, Prince, which had been given to him in 1921, to start a conversation. The 2 animals began to play, but then began to fight. Hitler then savagely beat his pet with a riding crop while yelling at it. Mitzi was appalled by his behavior and asked him how he could be so brutal with his dog. Hitler simply replied, "It was necessary." That was his letter of introduction to the girl. But after their first meeting in the park, it seemed like the relationship would end there and then. According to her nephew, also named Richard, who recounted after the war, Mitzi's first impression was horrible. "I couldn't stand being with that man with that stupid moustache under his nose. Besides, he's 20 years older than me," the girl said. But Hitler didn't give in. At the hotel where he was staying, he announced a talk for members of the Nazi Party. He went down to the store and invited the sisters. Mitzi accepted, She saw him speak like a madman, his eyes fixed on her, and she fell madly in love with the man. But at the same time, the age difference paralyzed her. Once, at her sister's house, Hitler approached her and asked for a kiss. She refused. He became enraged and left shouting, "Heil!" and slamming the door. But he was enchanted by the girl. Mitzi was the ideal of beauty that embodied Nazism, blonde and with blue eyes. After their anger and apology, Hitler and Mitzi began dating. He used several nicknames for her. In addition to Mitzi, he called her Mimi or Mimi Lane. But despite their closeness, they couldn't have an open relationship, nor were their encounters supposed to take place in public view. Everything had to take place clandestinely. The first outing was extremely strange. Hitler asked her if he could accompany her to the cemetery where Maria's mother was buried. The first kiss finally came when they were both walking along Lake Starnberg. According to her account, Hitler picked her up in the Mercedes-Benz driven by his chauffeur, Emil Maurice. During the journey, he approached her, took her hand and placed it in his lap, then held the other and squeezed it, saying, "Now I have your hands, and I have you." Then, Mitzi recounted, Hitler put his arm around her neck and held her close for the rest of the journey. When they arrived at a secluded spot, he led her to a tree, kissed her, and asked her to call him Mein Wolf, my wolf. There, he also christened her the Wood Nymph, Berchtesgaden's skating team to Munich. There she met him, and Hitler told her that in the future he wanted her to be his wife, to start a family, to have Aryan children. But at that moment he didn't have time to think about such things. Hitler in those years was too busy reorganizing the Nazi Party to even think about marriage. "My bride is Germany," he used to say. Proof that he did not want to formalize with anyone is that, on one of his many trips from Munich to Berchtesgaden, Hitler appeared for Maria's 17th birthday. On the occasion, he gave her a deluxe, leather-bound edition of Mein Kampf. She reciprocated the gift with 2 pillows on which he had embroidered the Nazi Party crest. Hitler proposed to Maria that they be lovers, but Mitzi refused. She wanted to be much more than that. In her delirium of love, she dreamed of a wedding. She was excited about becoming the Nazi First Lady. The Führer, disappointed by her refusal and by the growing fear that this spurned minor would be an obstacle to his political career, began to distance himself from her, and Mitzi was devastated. During that time, however, they exchanged letters, but despite their words, they didn't see each other again for years. On this point, there's a fact that some historians report, but without much evidence. Hitler was being blackmailed within his own party over his relationship with the minor. According to Lothar Machtan, the target was his driver, Emil Maurice, and his girlfriend Ida Arnold, who pretended to be friends with Mitzi and sent letters to the party detailing their relationship. It's hard to believe that Hitler, with all the power he wielded, would have succumbed to blackmail. However, Emil Maurice was later removed. The official version stated that he had Jewish ancestors, but by that time Hitler was already living in Munich with his niece, Geli Raubal, and had discovered an affair between her and Emil. Maria Reiter, for her part, tried to forget Hitler. In 1930 she married a hotelier named Fernand Woolrich, but the marriage was a disaster, and a year later they separated. Shortly after, according to her account, she tried to return to Hitler's inner circle through Rudolf Hess. She saw the Führer in Munich and they had a night of pleasure and reunion. Despite the many versions of the Nazi leader's sexuality, according to her, he was normal in bed. Hitler, who was already having a clandestine relationship with Eva Braun, again proposed that they become lovers, something the young woman rejected for the second time. It was unthinkable for Hitler to have a relationship with a divorcee. In 1936, Maria Reiter remarried, this time to an SS officer named Georg Kubisch, who worked alongside Joseph Goebbels. However, 2 years later, she and Hitler met again. According to her account, he spoke ill of Eva Braun to her. In June 1940, at the age of 32, Kubisch was killed in action during the Battle of Dunkirk. As consolation, Hitler sent Maria 100 red roses and an invitation to see him, which she declined. After Hitler's fall and the end of World War II, Maria Reiter married for a third time, this time to a disabled former Nazi officer named Walter Zieran. She died in 1992 and is buried in Munich. She had no children. According to her nephew Richard, it was because Hitler asked her to have a hysterectomy, yet another cruelty worthy of a monster. The Final Love, the pathetic story of Eva Braun, the woman who gave everything to marry Hitler. Eva Braun's name is intimately linked to that of Adolf Hitler. This is the pathetic story of the young woman who fell in love with the Nazi leader when she was 17 and he was 40, and shared his life until the very end. Her decision didn't even have the epic quality of a heroine or the quality of love, but rather the hallmarks of submission and delirium. She settled for the Führer's strange way of loving, with his snubs, his betrayals, his indecipherable passion between love and death. Not even Eva Braun possessed the fascination of the enigma. She was a simple, depressed woman in a complex world that was alien, incomprehensible, and mysterious to her. Having attempted suicide twice, she fell in with Hitler at the age of 33 because she had no other choice. She had chosen him in her early youth, with the spirit of an adolescent drama rather than the stoicism of the Greeks. Even history was unfaithful to her. She married Hitler the day before he killed himself and asked those around her to call her that, Mrs. Hitler, or Eva Hitler. But the future played a trick on her, and she will always be remembered as Eva Braun. Eva Anna Paula Braun was born in Munich on February 6, 1912. She was the daughter of a schoolteacher and the middle sister of Franziska and Margarete Gretel, who would follow in their footsteps in a romantic alliance with the Nazi hierarchy. When she was 9, her parents separated and remarried the following year for financial reasons, both harassed by the catastrophic economy of the Weimar Republic, when a postage stamp cost 1,000,000 marks, and Germans papered their rooms with the useless paper or used it as fuel for their winter stoves. Eva was educated at the Catholic high school in Munich and later at the commercial school of the English Sisters of Simbach am Inn in Bavaria, which is today a tourist resort near Austria. She was just another student with neither high nor low grades, famous instead for her athletic talent, an activity she never abandoned. At 17, Eva got a job at Heinrich Hoffmann's photography studio. She was the errand girl. Only Hoffmann wasn't just another professional, but the official photographer of the Nazi Party. She was able to learn some of the virtues of the profession and went from cleaning lady and shop assistant to working as a photographer. It was in that studio that in 1929 she met Hitler. Legend has it that he was introduced to her as Herr Wolf, Mr. Wolf, and that she didn't recognize him, despite the fact that at that time Hitler was preparing his assault on power. He had been trying to seize power through a coup d'etat for 6 years. Eva was blonde, had short hair, blue eyes, a Nordic appearance, and a smile always ready. Almost an example of the Aryan race that Hitler wanted to perpetuate as dominator. But she eluded the German woman's commitment to the Nazi ideal. She didn't want children, dressed fashionably, wore makeup, smoked and enjoyed parties, jazz, champagne and travel. All of this lay behind a shy personality. But at 17 she had earned the nickname the most beautiful girl in Munich. Upon meeting her, Hitler didn't behave like a gentleman. Despite the age difference, he was 40. He offered to take her home in his Mercedes-Benz, an invitation she evaded, but which she took note of, and they began to see each other more frequently between 1930 and 1931. During that time, Hitler was having an alleged affair with his niece Geli Raubal, until the young woman supposedly left the scene. Then, what was supposedly a parallel relationship became one-sided. Eva Braun became Hitler's official partner, who always kept her hidden for propaganda reasons, supported by the architect of Nazi publicity, Joseph Goebbels. According to these designs, Hitler had only one love, one girlfriend, one wife, Germany. Eva accepted her secondary role, perhaps with joy, but certainly with resignation. In 1932, her younger sister, Gretel, joined the photographer Hoffmann's studio. The Hitler-Braun relationship was complicated, and when it wasn't, one of them made it more complicated. The Führer's constant travels made her feel abandoned, left aside, forgotten. Hitler wasn't a demonstrative type, to put it simply. There are almost no photos showing any gesture of tenderness between the two, not even when Eva became his official lover. On August 10, 1932, Eva shot herself in the chest with her father's pistol. She missed, or tried to miss. It's easier to hit a shot in the chest than to miss the target. The attempt acted as a wake-up call for Hitler. Raubal's death had been swiftly and prudently covered up, and there had only been the hint of a scandal. But a new fallout involving another of the leader's girlfriends could derail Hitler's aspirations, and just 5 months later he would become Reich Chancellor. In any case, Hitler understood the message immediately. After Eva's recovery, by the end of that same year, they were officially lovers. When Hitler lived in Munich, which wasn't very common, they both lived in his apartment, and Eva often traveled in Hitler's retinue as Hoffmann's photographer. But she wasn't a happy girl. In 1935, she started a diary, or continued another, of which no trace survives, in which she reveals her discontent, her loneliness, perhaps her boredom, her hopelessness, and once again her desire to be out of the way. One fragment of that diary reads, "The weather is lovely, and I, the lover of the greatest man in Germany and the world, have to sit at home, staring out the window. My God, if only he would answer me, a single word in 3 months of absence. There's no hope. If only someone would come and help me." He was exaggerating. In 1935, Braun took part in a Nazi party congress in Nuremberg for the first time as part of the photographer's team. At the end of that year, Eva had her second attempt at getting out of the way. She took 25 sleeping pills, which either didn't kill her or she was rescued in time by the doctors. Hitler got the message again. In August, he gave Eva and her sister Gretel a 3-room apartment in Munich. In 1936, Eva began accompanying Hitler to the Eagle's Nest and had a private apartment in the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, designed by the architect Albert Speer. Dark days. The macabre and turbulent coexistence between Braun and Hitler. The couple's sex life is another mystery of their stormy relationship. In 1943, already in the midst of the war, Eva went to see the architect Speer with tears in her eyes. "The Führer told me to find someone else, because he recognizes that he is no longer capable of fulfilling his role as a man." Eva also saw Hitler's personal physician, Theodor Morell, who always maintained that Hitler's sexuality had been normal. Some historians maintain that Hitler and Eva never had sexual relations because she suffered from Mayer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome, a condition of the reproductive system resulting in a narrow or short vaginal canal that makes sexual intercourse unbearably painful. The girl was operated on by the prominent Nazi gynecologist Dr. Gustav Scholten. Despite being an untouchable figure in Hitler's entourage, Eva never entered politics, remaining outside of war decisions and the progress of the German economy. She was never a member of the Nazi Party, and her interests lay in sports, music, and film. It was only in 1943, when the tide of the war was leaning in the Allies' favor, that Hitler imposed serious economic restrictions on his crumbling empire, limitations that included a possible ban on cosmetics and other luxuries for women. At that moment, Eva approached Hitler, outraged by the implications of these measures for German women, which caused Hitler to back down, ordering a temporary halt to cosmetics production instead of a complete ban. Many of the images of Hitler at the Eagle's Nest, the holiday home located in the Bavarian Alps, were taken by Braun, who at that time was developing her vocation for photography and film. She was a first lady who never served as such, as Hitler himself prevented her from doing so. Only at the Berghof was she respected, though not entirely. The Führer's inner circle kept quiet about Eva, but they feared that any slight would bring them disgrace. She also bathed nude in Lake Königssee, which was a way of honoring the Nazi principles of body worship. Hitler somewhat abhorred these practices, just as he also abhorred Eva's makeup and her smoking. The end of the Reich caught her at Hitler's side. On June 3, 1944, as the Russians were already marching their troops toward Berlin and 3 days before the Allied landing in Normandy, her sister Gretel married General Hermann. Fegelein, who was the liaison officer between Hitler's inner circle and the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler. The ceremony allowed Eva Braun to be presented at official events, but as Fegelein's sister-in-law and not as German First Lady or Führer's wife. In the final days of Nazism, when Hitler was already living locked in his bunker at the Chancellery and the Russians had entered the outskirts of Berlin, Himmler tried to reach an agreement with the Allies. Furious, Hitler had Fegelein shot in the Chancellery Gardens. It wasn't even a proper military execution. He was machine-gunned in the back on April 28, 1945. Hitler had already decided to leave the scene, Eva had decided to follow him, and the two had decided to get married. For some reason, in his political testament, Hitler felt it necessary to state that the decision to die with him was Eva's alone. He also crudely defined their relationship. He called his secretary Traudel, Junge, and dictated to her, "At the end of my life, I have decided to marry the woman who, after many years of true friendship, came to this city of her own free will, when it was already almost completely besieged, to share my fate. It is her wish to die with me as my wife. This will compensate us for what we have both lost because of my work in the service of my people." The next day, Hitler and Eva left each other's company. Before lunch, they had, of course, some pathetic pasta with tomato sauce. Then, around 3 in the afternoon, they locked themselves in the Führer's office. 2 faithful men remained outside, the aide-de-camp Ling and the young SS officer Otto Günsche. Hitler ordered them to burn his body and Eva's in a well in the Chancellery Garden. He didn't want to fall into Russian hands, even if he was dead. Unity Mitford, Hitler's British mistress, suspected by the Gestapo of being a spy. Unity Mitford, a young British aristocrat, left a controversial legacy by becoming one of the foreign figures closest to Adolf Hitler. Her fascination with the Nazi leader led her to live in Munich and enter his inner circle. She also recorded her experiences in a personal diary. The diary, which spans the period from 1935 to 1939, details her encounters and intimacies, which place her as the German dictator's girlfriend. In 1933, when she was just 18 years old, Unity attended a Hitler rally in Nuremberg for the first time with her sister Diana, wife of Oswald Mosley, leader of British fascism. This event marked the beginning of her obsession with the Führer, to the point to devise a plan to meet him. In 1934, she convinced his parents, Lord and Lady Redesdale, to move to Munich under the guise of learning German. Once in Germany, Unity frequented the Osteria Bavaria restaurant for months, a place Hitler regularly visited. She would always sit in the same place to get his attention, even dropping books or talking loudly. Finally, after 8 months of waiting, the Führer noticed her presence and they began to develop a relationship. On Monday, February 18th of that year, they had one of their first close encounters. The Führer invited her to his table and they talked for 2 hours. The young woman wrote about Hitler. "He speaks beautifully. He invites me to visit him in Berlin if I go and compliments me on my German." Unity not only managed to get close to Hitler, but became a frequent visitor to his inner circle. Her personal diary records a total of 139 meetings with the Führer, some of them private. As their relationship progressed, she also interacted with key figures in the Nazi regime, such as the architect Albert Speer. He noted, according to the outlet, that no other foreigner had become as close to Hitler as Unity did. Her closeness generated rumors about a possible role as a British spy. According to statements collected in David Price Jones' biography, an SS officer who knew Unity claimed that Erich Widmann, a member of the SS and Unity's suitor, was ordered to keep an eye on her. However, according to this same source, Widmann soon developed personal feelings towards her. Her fascination aroused suspicion, but nothing was ever proven. Meanwhile, she was increasingly meeting with him and his circle. By this time, the girl was already hopelessly in love. In her diary, she recorded, "The Führer arrives at 2:10 p.m. and leaves at 3:15 p.m. He says goodbye to me. He turns around 3 times to look at me and then back at his car, sadly, without smiling. I feel miserable. I go home. I cry myself to sleep. As the months passed, they continued to see each other and seemed likely to flirt, but by all accounts, they never established anything but a platonic relationship. In 1939, after the outbreak of World War II, Unity tried to get out of the way in Germany. Apparently, she had been invited to leave the country and couldn't bear to be away from Hitler. Although she survived, she was permanently damaged and returned to England, where she lived in seclusion, never seeing Hitler again until his death in 1948. The Sinister Chamber. Leni Riefenstahl, the best propagandist of the Nazi regime that Hitler loved. Leni Riefenstahl was considered one of the greatest film directors in history, and despite the fact that she lived more than 90 years and is part of universal culture, she never stopped carrying the stigma of having exalted Nazism in her films. Leni was Adolf Hitler's personal filmmaker and the star director of Nazi propaganda through Joseph Goebbels. "I didn't know about politics, I just filmed it," Leni said. Riefenstahl repeatedly criticized her for her role in the 58 years she survived the fall of Nazism in a vain attempt to rid herself of the burden of having been the Third Reich's greatest propagandist. For some benevolent historians and critics who admire her work, she was naive. For others, she knew exactly what she was doing and why, to the point of calling her the Nazi whore. What no one disputes is that she was one of the best and most brilliant filmmakers of the 20th century, and that her films, Triumph of the Will, 1935, and Olympiad, 1938, are 2 innovative masterpieces of cinema, even though it's impossible not to see them as 2 sophisticated and highly effective products of disseminating Nazi ideology and its conception of the master race. In that sense, if Albert Speer was the architect of the Reich, Riefenstahl was undoubtedly its filmmaker. Neither of them, who largely survived the fall of Nazism, was convicted of war crimes, but both remained cursed in international memory. Not only because of their closeness to Adolf Hitler, but also because their works sought to immortalize an expansionist dictatorship that aimed to endure and dominate the world for 1,000 years. Her films earned Riefenstahl a privileged place in the cultural geography of the Nazi regime even before the war, while other prominent filmmakers, such as Fritz Lang and Robert Wien, were forced into exile, not to continue filming but simply to save their lives. But the life of Hitler's favorite film director also had a before and after Nazism. Helene Bertha Amelie Riefenstahl was born in Berlin on August 22, 1902, and her childhood was marked by the various plans her parents had for her. He, a successful businessman, wanted his daughter to follow in his footsteps. Her mother, on the other hand, supported from the beginning the passion that Leni, as she was known at home, developed for dance after attending a performance of Snow White. From 1920 to 1923, she worked as a secretary in her father's company, where she learned typing, shorthand and accounting in exchange for being allowed to take painting, drawing and dance classes. Between 1920 and 1926, she furthered her career as a dancer, which included an invitation to the main German stage, the Deutsches Theater. However, a knee injury forced him to withdraw. She then turned to cinema, first as an actress, with leading roles in 6 films shot between 1930 and 1933. Even then, she attracted attention for her beauty and above all for a talent that seemed innate. She made her directorial debut in 1932 with The Blue Light, in which she also starred. The film was a success. The National Board of Film Critics in New York considered it among the best foreign films, and it also won the silver medal at the 1932 International Film Festival. Venice. Shortly after its premiere, a man on the rise to power saw The Blue Light in a Berlin cinema. His name was Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party, and he was fascinated by the film. Shortly after, Leni and Hitler met in person, and the future dictator of Germany told her, "Once we come to power, you're going to make my films." Having become Chancellor of the Reich and shortly after the master of all power in Germany, Hitler made all the financial, technical, and human resources she needed for her works available to Riefenstahl. During those years, hundreds of rumors plagued Leni's life, but the main ones said were that she was a lover of both Hitler and Goebbels. In the case of the Minister of Propaganda, he was famous for having a certain fondness for actresses. It is said that he slept with hundreds of women in exchange for placing them in film and theatre roles. However, Leni's relationship with Goebbels was not the best. It is said that the minister was jealous of Riefenstahl's innate talent. As for Hitler, it's true that they spent a lot of time together, but the Führer, who had a genuine admiration for the artist, didn't show the same kind of attraction he did for his other lovers. That admiration never turned into passion or lust. He admired her as one admires a Chinese vase. She was beautiful, but she had no place in his life. In 1936, at Hitler's request, she filmed the Olympic Games being held in Berlin, and the result was Olympiad, released in 1938. In this film, the director creates an exalted elegy on the aesthetic beauty of athletic bodies, which was identified with the ethnic ideal of the Aryan race. By then, the Führer's favorite filmmaker was in an intense relationship with Mountain Infantry First Lieutenant Peter Jacob, whom she introduced to Hitler's circle. In her memoirs, Leni claimed that she had never felt so loved, but the relationship ended abruptly shortly after the end of the war. After Germany's surrender, her work as a propagandist for the regime led to lengthy interrogations, during which she remained steadfast. She knew nothing about the concentration camps. She had been naive, but not an accomplice of the Nazis. From then on, she turned to a cinema that distanced her from that past that had first earned her glory and then social condemnation. In the 1960s, she began to be fascinated by the history of Africa and, more specifically, by the Nubian tribes of Sudan. She made several trips to the Black Continent to live with them and make a documentary and photographic works about their rituals and customs. Her later work failed to make Hitler's favorite filmmaker forget her Nazi past, whose infamy as a propagandist for the brutal Third Reich haunted her until her dying day. Elsa Bruckmann, the governess and millionairess who helped create the anti-Semitic monster. Elsa Bruckmann was a Romanian aristocrat, born in 1865 as Princess Cantacuzene of Romania, daughter of Prince Theodore of Romania. She was married to the German publisher Hugo Bruckmann, and both were devoted followers of Hitler, to the point of helping finance his political career before and after his failed coup d'etat in 1923. Elsa was devoted to Hitler, and due to her servility and close relationship with him, she was haunted by rumors of having had a lustful affair with the German politician. As a show of support for the Nazi Party, Bruckmann founded a high society salon, through which he was able to put Hitler in contact with important and wealthy people, including industrialists who could finance his party. The truth is that the Bruckmanns were anti-Semitic long before Hitler used this element as a creator of political identity. At the beginning of the 20th century, Elsa Bruckmann opened her Munich salon on January 26, 1899, which became an important meeting place for socially influential people in politics, business, science, and art, and which she ran until her husband's death in 1941. That day, amid glasses of champagne and the most expensive wines, Elsa received her guests with readings from 19th century anti-Semitic books, quoting authors such as Houston Stewart Chamberlain. The meetings always took place on Fridays, initially at the headquarters of the Bruckmann publishing house. Among the guests were scientists such as Norbert von Hellingrath and Rudolf Kastner, or business leaders such as Emil Kirdorf and writers such as Rainer Maria Rilke, Hugo von Hofmannsthal and Stefan Gorge, as well as members of the George Circle such as Alfred Schuler and Ludwig Klages. Although Elsa Bruckmann was German nationalist and anti-Semitic from an early age, her salon was also frequented in the first 2 decades of its existence by reformists and left liberals such as Harry Graf Kessler, and intellectuals who were later persecuted for their Jewish ancestry, such as Karl Wolfskiel, who was also a member of the George Circle. In 1920, Bruckmann met Adolf Hitler at a festive event at the Krone Circus. Elsa had heard of this politician who promoted anti-Semitism, nationalism, and revisionism. She therefore sought personal contact with Hitler for political reasons and soon drew him into her social circle. She visited him several times at Landsberg Fortress, where he was imprisoned for the Hitler-Ludendorff Putsch. She wrote of her first visit, "Then Adolf Hitler came to greet me, in his short Bavarian jacket and yellow linen jacket, simple, natural, gentlemanly, and with shining eyes." Bruckmann began an enthusiastic relationship and felt called to support the much younger man in every way. Immediately after his early release from prison, Hitler visited the Bruckmanns on 23 December 1924. Elsa introduced him to her salon, where from then on, he and other Nazi figures such as Rudolf Hess, Alfred Rosenberg, and Baldur von Schirach set the tone. Soon he became, together with Helene Bechstein, Hitler's most important social supporter, also provided him with valuable business contacts. She temporarily took over Hitler's rent, supplied him with fashionable evening clothes and shoes, and attempted to add a social touch. For example, she explained how to eat an artichoke or a lobster, or how to kiss a woman's hand. For a time, she became the future Führer's governess of ceremony and protocol. She acquired the furniture for the new Nazi Party headquarters, inaugurated in June 1925, and later provided some of the furnishings for Hitler's representative apartment in Munich, for which the Bruckmanns had also assumed a guarantee. She used her experience as a writer to help Hitler write the second volume of Mein Kampf, made her palace available to the political leader on several occasions, and used her numerous social contacts to gain members and sympathizers for the Combat League for German Culture, which sought to attract intellectuals, artists, patrons, the rich, and other important personalities, and above all, those with deep wallets, to the nationalist and anti-Semitic ideology. Bruckmann joined the Nazi Party on July 1, 1932, but her membership in the party was backdated to April 1, 1925, with membership number 92 by order of Hitler, since she had requested admission to the party in 1925, but Hitler had denied it, considering her more useful as a civilian than being immediately identified with the party. Elsa and Hugo Bruckmann had no children. Elsa had a particularly close relationship with her sister's son, Norbert von Hellingrath. Her nephew was a writer and Germanist who was a popular patron of the art at the time, but fought in the German army during the First World War and died in the Great Battle of Verdun. It is said that his death unsettled Elsa, and that she saw in the young Adolf Hitler a sort of replacement for her beloved relative, whom she could look after. As for the suspicions of an affair, it is likely that Elsa was in love or fascinated by Hitler, but he never noticed her romantically. The Führer always liked women younger than him, and when she met Bruckmann, she was 6 decades old, a great deal of experience for serving as a governess. However, there are no accounts or documents that prove that they had any other type of relationship. Elsa Bruckmann died of old age at the age of 81 in 1946, after seeing her anti-Semitic golden boy fail miserably. The sad story of Inga Ley, Hitler's platonic love. Inga Ley, born Inga Ursula Spilker in Breslau, Imperial Germany on March 8, 1916, was a mezzo-soprano and wife of Robert Ley, a prominent trade union leader in the pre-war period of Nazi Germany. In 1935, at the age of 19, while performing at the Friedrichstadt Palast, Inga met Nazi leader Robert Ley, who was 26 years her senior, close to Adolf Hitler's inner circle and responsible for the Strength Through Joy project, a Nazi political organization that existed between 1933 and 1945, dedicated to the task of structuring, monitoring, and standardizing the leisure time of the German population in Nazi Germany. By then, Inga was a young woman who stood out for her size, grace, and charisma, ideal of the Aryan woman, being also of a remarkable beauty that even impressed Hitler. In 1937, Inga accompanied Ley on a tourist cruise trip to Italy, and they formalized their courtship. They married on August 20th, 1938, and their honeymoon took place on the ocean liner K.S. Robert Ley, in March 1939. Adolf Hitler, who was close to the couple, was present on board. Robert Ley was a violent alcoholic in private, and Inga Ley often found refuge at the Berghof, Hitler's holiday home in Obersalzberg, being a frequent visitor. Inga Ley developed a great admiration for Adolf Hitler, and it is certain that the feeling was mutual, which has led several historians to hypothesize that they developed a mutual Platonic love. In 1940, Hitler gave the Leys the equivalent of a small fortune of 1 million Reichsmarks to develop a farm in Gut-Rotland, Waldbröl. This donation also included staff to cover their needs. Hitler visited them at least twice a week and spent a lot of time with Inga, who was 24 at the time. Beginning in 1940, Inga Ley's health declined due to a recurrence of a painful illness that made her addicted to morphine. In March 1941, while she was 6 months pregnant and riding in a carriage near a railway line, the horses became frightened by a train whistle, throwing their passenger off their feet and causing a tremendous impact that led to the premature birth of her daughter, whom she named Gloria. Doctors treated her with morphine, instilling in her a complete dependence on the drug. Guts Farm, Rotland, brought in Russian slave laborers in mid-1942, and as a form of self-defense, each trusted employee was issued a revolver for use in case of assault. Inga also received a gun. By the time war broke out, the Führer, her closest confidant and former crush, no longer visited her, nor did they exchange letters. Hitler was merely a tale uttered by her violent husband, a reminder that she had nothing else left in the world, not a friend to call on. On December 29, 1942, Robert Ley was due to travel to Hitler's headquarters in Berlin. Apparently, she couldn't bear to be away from her husband, so who went up to his bedroom and in a flash got out of the way, dying immediately. Renate Müller, Hitler's lover, hunted by the Gestapo who could have overthrown the Führer. Renate Müller was born in Munich on April 26, 1906. She became an actress and made several films between the wars, mostly in the genre style, although with a greater presence of Nazi propaganda around 1933. Müller met Adolf Hitler while shooting a film near the Danish coast in the autumn of 1932. The Führer watched the shoot all day and that evening visited the house where she was staying. She would later write of that encounter. Hitler sat there motionless, looking at me the whole time, and then he would take my hand and look at me some more. He talked the whole time, nothing but nonsense. The Führer did not make a good first impression. After this, Hitler arranged frequent meetings with her. Each time he saw her, he brought her luxurious items. Hitler was determined to win her over, and among the jewels he gave her was a diamond bracelet, more valuable than any of the gifts he had given to Geli, Mitzi, and Eva Braun. But beyond the luxuries, the young actress was reluctant to become involved with the Führer. Apparently his demands were very unpleasant. One evening, over drinks at the Chancellery, Hitler began detailing the Gestapo's torture methods, comparing them to medieval techniques. According to the actress, after they both undressed, he lay on the floor, begging her to hit and kick him. She refused, but he continued to insult himself, saying that he was her slave, unworthy of being in the same room with her. Finally giving in, she began kicking him, hurling obscene words at him and beating him with her whip. Increasingly aroused, Hitler began to masturbate. After his orgasm, he quietly suggested they both get dressed. They drank a glass of wine together and continued making small talk. Finally, he stood up, kissed her hand, thanked her for a pleasant evening, and called a servant to escort her out. As part of her privileges as the Führer's lover, Renate Müller obtained permission from Adolf Hitler to visit London. It has been claimed that she was kept under surveillance by the Gestapo during her stay there, and after spending much time with a former Jewish lover, Frank Deutsch, she discovered upon her return to Germany that she had been blacklisted. She also heard rumors suggesting that she would be tried for racial vilification. Friends claim that under this pressure she became addicted to morphine. With her career in ruins, she became a young drug addict and was sent to a sanatorium. In 1936, she obtained a partial discharge and made a formal request to meet with Hitler, but permission was refused, so she returned to the sanatorium voluntarily. On the 1st of October 1937, Renate Müller was looking out of her window when a car stopped in front of the sanatorium, and 4 SS officers got out. Panicked, she jumped out of the window and died at the age of 30. Had she survived, she might have been dangerous to Hitler just as Geli had been. Either of them could have caused him harm by revealing the truth about her sexual habits. In 1937, when her death was reported in the German press, they did not reveal either that Hitler had known her or that she had died. Hitler did not attend the cremation, but Goebbels sent a wreath